Hi, and welcome to this week's 4-H Hooked on Fishing Activity Guide. This is week 4. My name is Nicole Cutterly. I'm the Extension Educator for 4-H Youth Development in North St. Louis County. And this week, our activity is the food chain. To get us started, we need to know a little bit more about exactly what is a food chain. A food chain is a series of illustrations or ways that energy and nutrition flow through an ecosystem or organisms within that ecosystem. A food chain is going to be comprised of a few different things. First of all, it has energy from the sun, just like what's pictured here. That energy helps to feed the entire food chain and keep things moving and functioning. Next, we want to move on to our producers. Our producers are at the bottom of our food chain. They're the ones that are focused around plants. In this case, it's phytoplanktons, and they're the ones that produce energy for other consumers. Now, there are 3 different kinds of consumers that occur within a food chain. The first is a primary consumer, which is comprised of things like invertebrates, or in our case, zooplankton. These primary consumers eat the producers. Then we have secondary consumers. These are our prey fish or crayfish or the animals that get eaten, and they feed on the primary consumers, which feed on the producers. So you're starting to see how all of this interacts together. Now, the last kind of a consumer that can happen in a food chain is a tertiary consumer, and this is the highest tier of our pyramid. This is the largest fish that largest animal you're gonna find in a food chain. And these tertiary consumers feed on the secondary consumers, which feed on the primary consumers, which feed on the producers. The producers get their energy for the sun. So this is how it's all starting to connect together in a roundabout food chain. Now, the last piece to this food chain is our decomposers, or our bacteria. They're the ones that break down dead plants and animals and give back some more energy to our producers, which then starts the cycle over again. Now, if you notice in this picture, anglers are added. An angler is also part of the food chain. An angler is a fisherman, or us. Sometimes they're considered tertiary consumers, and sometimes they're just an additional consumer that's added to the food chain. All right, so let's take a little bit deeper dive into this. So like I said before, the sun is our main source of energy. This gives everything energy within our food chain. It gives the smallest producers their energy. It also heats the water, keeping our fish warm. It does a lot for our fish ecosystem. So it's a really important part, which is why it's included in our food chain. Next, we have our plants. In our case, with a fish food cycle, we have phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is the tiny, free-floating plants that you're going to find within the ecosystem. These are the smallest things. Producers feed on these little pieces of plant material that are green and floating throughout the water. Now, zooplankton is considered a producer in our ecosystem, or our food chain. These are tiny animals. Sometimes they also can be considered different kinds of bacteria. They feed on the phytoplankton. They feed on that producer, making them that primary consumer in our ecosystem. Now, a lot of times you just hear the word plankton. That is just the definition for both of these, the phytoplankton and the zooplankton. It's just referring to the smallest living organisms in our aquatic environments, or our water environments. So a lot of times people get that confused on why we use phytoplankton, zooplankton, and just plankton in general. Plankton's just the category that it's placed under. All right, so as we move up that pyramid again, we're getting into our secondary consumers. And in our case, in this example, I'm going to use the green sunfish. The green sunfish is going to be found in our pond, and they are going to feed on the zooplankton, which then feeds back on that phytoplankton, which the phytoplankton then gets the energy from the sun. So we're starting to kind of put the pieces together and how all of this is connected. Now, what eats the green sunfish? Well, the largemouth bass does. And also us as anglers, we tend to eat that green sunfish as well, which is how we can be placed in that tertiary consumer role. In this case, we're going to put the largemouth bass in that tertiary consumer role because they feed on the green sunfish, which then feeds on the zooplankton, which then feeds on the phytoplankton, which then gets the energy back from the sun. All right, so the last step in our our food chain is the decomposers. These are the ones that break down all of the dead material that you're going to find. This is dead material from plants, could be fish guts left from a fisherman, could be a dead fish from whatever happened to that fish. All of those things, these decomposers grab onto those things. They break them down, giving then the phytoplankton, in our case, more energy to create more phytoplankton to then feed the zooplankton. So that's why we focus this in a circle format, and that's why we also have the arrows in between showing who eats who and how the energy, which is what the arrows represent, flows through our food chain. Now, another thing for tertiary consumers, we talk about larger predator fish, we talk about us as humans, but we can also think of it as other animals that might eat fish. So this could be bears, could be eagles. Possibilities are endless there with what it is. So this week, your challenge is to make your own food chain. How can you do that? Grab a piece of paper, make a drawing. You can create different things that represent producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, decomposers, okay? You want each one of those things represented somewhere in your food chain. You're going to want to create the arrows to move them through, and don't forget about the sun. Another great way to demonstrate this is if you use a paper plate and put your drawings on a paper plate. You can also print pictures out. You could make things out of construction paper. Be creative, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with for your food chains this week. Thank you so much, and we will see you all soon.